Good morning. Today's daf is daf Kuf Mem. We are at the top of Kuf Mem in Bava Basra. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. Here we go. Yesterday we learned the opening Mishnah of the ninth chapter of Bava Basra, and the Mishnah distinguished between two situations. One where there are sufficient assets, and so the sons inherit and the daughters are supported. We saw the machlokas yesterday, whether supported means just with respect to food or also with respect to clothing and marriage. And then when there's insufficient assets, the daughters get the support and the sons go begging. So as we pick up with the third line of Kuf Mem Amud Aleph, the Gemara addresses what happens when the assets change over time. So let's take a look. Pshita merubim v'nismatu. It's clear that if they were sufficient, they were plentiful, and then they became insufficient, they became meager. Kvar zachu v'hen yorshin. The heirs have already taken possession, and so as a result, mu'atan v'nisrabu mai. I'm sorry. So as a result, they've gotten whatever they're going to get, and the daughters are going to potentially suffer. Meaning, well, actually, let's take a look in the Rashbam, who clarifies exactly what it's not clear in the Gemara who's the winner and who's the loser in this situation. One could argue that it seems like only the Yorshin, only the heirs are winners, but that's not necessarily the case. Pshita merubim v'nismatu, second of the narrow lines in the Rashbam. Bishas misa hayu merubin. At the time of death, the assets were plentiful. V'achshav hokiru mizonos, the price of food went up. Onis kalkalu hanichasim, or the properties became ruined. V'chasru, and as a result became lesser. V'ein behen kidei mazon. Elu ve'elu, and therefore now are no longer sufficient to feed both the boys and the girls ad yivgaru, until the girls get to an age of maturity. So and so the idea here is all right, and let's take a look at the next Rashbam. Kvar zachu b'hen yorshim, so the heirs have already taken it. Bishas misas avian, at the time that their father died, the karina behu nechasim merubim, and we considered it to be a larger estate. V'yikhu banot chelkan hamigiyam kafi shuma shel shas misas avihen. So the daughters take what they expect to need based on their estimate at the time of the death of their father, as far as what they'll need in order to feed them and potentially clothe them and help them get married until they become adults. V'habanim yirshu chelkam shayim migiyam, and then the sons inherit everything else, and they get everything else, but osasha at that particular moment in time. The kol mashachasru nechasim, and now that the assets are too little, chasru lebanot ulebanim, it ends up losing out for the daughters and the sons. L'kol echad kafi chelko haroilo, each one according to the share that they have. Meaning that if in fact the price of food goes up, well, then that's going to obviously hurt the daughters and potentially the sons, but especially the daughters who were determined. The amount that was set aside for them was determined based on how much the food would cost. And so as a result, they're going to now have insufficient assets, even though the value of the properties may still exceed what is necessary. It's going to be tough luck for them. Whereas and on the other hand, if it's the value of the properties that went down, but the price of the food has not changed, well, then the daughters haven't lost anything because they can still buy the food at the price that was estimated at the very beginning. But now the sons who may have put up the money in order to keep the property will now end up having property that is worth even potentially less than the money that they ended up giving to the daughters if the price goes down sufficiently. So we can see that in this case of Merubim and Ismatu, you can imagine situations where the daughters lose, and you can imagine situations where the sons lose. So, but what about the other direction? And the bottom line is that everything's been divided because it was already sufficient. So as a result, basically you get what you get and you don't get upset. But mu'atin v'nisrabu mai. But now back into the Gemara. We're now again on the fourth line at the end of the fourth line, last three words on the fourth line. Mu'ata v'nisrabu mai. What happens if it was originally too small, meaning that all of the assets were going to be assigned for the daughters and none of the assets were going to be assigned for the sons? Well, Bershus Yorshin Kaimi, do we say that that it was really still in the domain of the heirs, meaning that the sons had sort of like a contingent right in it, and so as a result, when the value goes up, they get to participate? And Hilkach Bereshus Yorshin Shabuach, and therefore, when it goes up, the heirs are going to get it, and it appreciates for them. Odilma Saluki Misalki Yorshin Mehacha, or maybe we'd say that it's too late. We've already given effectively the assets to the daughters, and now it's gone up in value, but the daughters are no longer around, but the sons are no longer around. So as a result, because all the assets have been given to the daughters in order to support them, and so it's tough luck on the sons. So Tashma, let's try and answer it from the following statement. Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Asi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Yisomim shekadmu umachru b'nechasim muatim. What happens if there's too little in the amount of assets? But what happens is even though it's supposed to now all go to the daughters, mashimakru machru, but the sons acted before the daughters took it, and they went ahead and sold it. And let's say they've already used all of the proceeds, and so there's nothing left for the daughters to take. Is that a valid transaction? Or do we say, no, it's an invalid transaction, and we're going to go back to the purchaser and say, we're going to take back that asset from you because you weren't allowed to buy it, because it was essentially stolen assets? And the answer is that it's considered sold. And so let's take a look in Rashbam, who provides an explanation of what we're talking about. Yisom shekadmu kodem shehemidu banos bedin, before the daughters establish the case in court, umakru, and now the orphan men sell the property, afilu b'nechasim muatim, even when there's not enough property for them to have taken an inheritance. Masha makru, what they have sold is sold. It's tough luck on the daughters. De'ein motzian lemazon ha'isha, because we don't undo a transaction in order to support the food, the eating of a woman. We do it, by the way, for their marriage purposes, but not for their food. V'habanos b'nechasim mishubadim kol shekain b'nechasim merubim. But for daughters, we do take out for encumbered property, meaning real estate, and certainly if there's sufficient property, then we would do it. Keda amar biksuvas ha'achem sheshibdu sheshabdu motziin leparnasa ve'ein motziin lezonos, because as it says in Maseches Ksuvos, this is Adaf Samachet Amabet, that it says that we don't, that if the sons encumber property, meaning that they sell real property, we're going to take it away from the purchaser in order to support the clothing and weddings of the daughters, but not for their food. So Shma Mina, Keved She'im Machru Mechiratan. Well, what does this all show us? Meaning, how does this answer their question? Right? Our question is, what happens to the assets if they were insufficient and then became sufficient? Do we say that the sons had an inherent right to the property? And so we're saying that Kevan She'im Machru Machira San Machira, that since if they sold the property and it was too little, it would be a valid sale. That shows Yesh Lahen Tfisas Yad B'Nechasim. They have a connection to the property. So therefore, Ve'im Nisrabu Yesh Lahen Chelik Behen. So as a result, if in fact it were to go up in value, so now that there are sufficient assets for the boys to inherit, so then they would get the Zechusam Behen Omedes. So it is so as a result, when it goes up in value, it is for their benefit. So we've answered the question. Now, Tosfos here has one minor disagreement. Rashbam says specifically that it's talking about a situation where the sons got up and took the property before the daughters took them to court and were able to establish the property for themselves. But Tosfos says it's more than that, or at least the Re says it's more than that. Perish Bekuntras, top Tosfos and Kuf Mem and Aleph. That actually we're talking about a situation where they got up and sold it before the daughters took them to court. Legabot banot for the daughters to grab onto the insufficient assets, so that they should be at least be able to support it to the extent that it can support them. But the Re disagrees, and he says even if the daughters already took their property, higbu lahem beitin, or the beitin took it for them, imachru achim machor. If the sons sell it, they have their sale is a sale, because on some level the sons still have a connection to the property because they are on some level the heirs biblically, and so as a result, if they actually sell something, it's considered a valid sale. So it's an interesting debate between Tosfos and Rashbam as to whether or not we're dealing with a case where the daughters have already taken the property, or only if they're waiting for the court to act do we say that the sale is a good sale. Okay, so now the Gemara asks the following question. We've now dealt with the situation of evaluating whether or not there are sufficient assets. And we said that there are going to be sufficient assets if there's enough money to support the boys and the girls until the girls become adults. If there is, well, then that shows that the boys are going to get an inheritance and the girls are going to get the money that's associated with their support. And if there isn't, well, then there's going to be the boys go begging and the girls get their support. What about when we have other kinds of claims against the estate? How do we calculate whether or not an estate is considered sufficient or insufficient vis-a-vis these other additional claims? So we're going to take a look at three kinds of claims. First, the claim by the widow. Second, a claim by the daughter of the widow, who may not be the daughter of the husband who's passed away, but the husband has promised to support this daughter in the ketubah. And then third, we're going to look at creditors, so outside creditors. So do any of these reduce the size of the estate? And the reason that this is important is because if they do reduce the size of the estate, that changes whether our framework is essentially one in which the boys inherit and the girls get supported. And so as a result, we're going to effectively take from both of them. Or are we going to say, no, it was sufficient, but now it's not sufficient. And so as a result, only the boys are going to lose and the daughters are going to get the necessary support. So Yasav Rabbi Yirmiyah Kamei de Rabbi Abahu v'kaboy minei. So Rabbi Yirmiyah sat in front of Rabbi Abahu and asked the following question. Almana so ma'u shetimai b'nechasim. What do we say about the widow in terms of whether or not she reduces the property, the amount of the property? Meaning, does do the expenses for supporting her, determine whether or not we treat the estate as sufficient or insufficient. Mi amrina kevan de isla mizone mimata. Do we say that because she's going to get supported, she reduces the estate? O dilma kevan de ilu minasvele slay. Or do we say that, well, once she gets married, she would no longer be supported? So hashanami leslay. So when it comes to calculating it, we can't necessarily calculate the precise amount that she's going to get. So as a result, we're just going to ignore it when it comes to determining whether or not the assets are sufficient. Of course, she will get the property, she will get the support that she needs, but does it not calculate, does it not get accounted for in determining whether the estate is sufficient or insufficient? So let's take a look in the Rashbam here. He goes through it in a little bit of detail, and I think it's worth going through. So Amanato Maushitimai Benechasim, we're 4 lines up in the narrow lines of the Rashbam on Kuf Mem Amud Aleph. Misha Meis, if the person who dies, V'hiniach banim ubanot, and he leaves over sons and daughters, V'hiniach nami amanato, and he leaves over also his widow, V'tzricha nami mizonos kol yemei migar armanolosa, and she's supposed to get supported for all of the days that she is his widow, meaning until she gets married. Ve'ein kan nechasim ela kedei mazon habanim v'habanos ad sheyivgeru. But right now, there's just the right amount for the boys and the girls until they become the age of adult. So miyamrina and kevan de isla mizone mimata. Do we say that because she's now supposed to also get fed from these assets, now it's no longer sufficient assets, and therefore we have to treat it the low mikri nechasim merubin? So we're no longer going to call it sufficient assets. Umafrishin mehanechasim mazon isha. So we're going to separate from the assets the what the wife is supposed to get, the habanos, and what the daughters are supposed to get, ad sheyivgeru, until they become mature, the hamoser, and whatever's left, it's not going to be sufficient, but whatever's left, lebanim, it will go to the sons, to hamuatininu, because this is considered insufficient. V'la'achar sheyotziu hamoser yishalu al apsachim, and after the sons use whatever's left over, they'll go and beg. Odilma, or maybe we'd say something different. Kevan de ilu mnisva lebal leisla mizone, or do we say, no, look, if she had gotten married immediately, she wouldn't get any food. Lo mimata. So as a result, we are not going to discount her the food that she's supposed to take from the overall estate. Ukaman de leisudamya, and we're going to treat her as if she doesn't even exist when it comes to evaluating whether the estate is sufficient or insufficient. And therefore, so we take out for the daughters whatever they need until they become adults. The kol hashar yirshu abanim, and the sons inherit everything else, kedin nechasim merubin, just as if it was a plentiful estate. Daha almana lo mimata, because we're going to say that the widow doesn't take anything away. Lahu, the karin and bahu habanim yirshu, and so as a result, we'll call the sons heirs. The habanos yuzono, and the daughters get supported. Umechelek habanos lo tizon ha'almana, and of course, we're not going to feed the daughters from. We're not going to feed the widow from the daughter's share, right? She's not going to take from the food that would go to the daughters. Because whether or not we're going to say that it's a plentiful estate or not a plentiful estate, or it's a meager estate or not a meager estate, because no matter whether if it's a meager estate, the sons have to go and beg, and the widow gets fed. And if it's not a meager estate, yuzonu yakad ha'almana v'habanim. So then the widow gets fed with the sons. Aval habanos. The daughters never lose, meaning the daughters are always going to get fed first. Klal at all. So bain mimata, bain lo mimata, whether it's a meager estate or not a meager estate. So what's the difference Daha benechasim merubim benechasim muatin Tanan habanos yizono. But whether it's a lot or a little, we say that the daughters are going to get fed. So that's possibility number one. So possibility number one is that if the that if certainly if the wife reduces, then everybody understands that the wife and the daughters get their amounts and the sons will get whatever's left and need to beg once that runs out. But if she does not reduce, then either the daughters get their property and the wife shares with the sons. That's a position number one, as shown on the screen. Or inami hegedolomimata, when she does not reduce. Mikro nechasim merubim, we call it sufficient assets. Va'aval pi shenis akva hayom olamachar mulinse, and even though today she has held back from getting married, Harehu kemerubin. We treat it as if the assets are plentiful. Venismatu de amrinan kivar zachu bahen kvar zachu bahen yorshin v'yazonu shlashtan yachad banim ubanos ve'almana. The alternative approach is to say that actually, if she does not reduce the estate and we treat the estate as sufficient, well, then all of the children get together, and it's as if it's like it's as if there was a sufficient estate that became smaller. And what did we say in that situation? When you have a sufficient estate that becomes smaller, everybody can take a hit. Sometimes the hit will be on the daughters, sometimes the hit will be on the sons. And so here, when we support the mother, when we support the widow, she's going to take away from everybody. So now you have two possible differences. One possible difference is that do we say that essentially that she gets estimated up front. If in fact there's insufficient, she gets estimated up front and she gets what she gets and she doesn't get upset. Or do we say that it's sufficient? And then there are two possibilities. Either the daughters get everything, the sons have to feed the widow, and whatever the sons get left is tough luck on them. Or do we say no? When we say that it's sufficient, everybody gets together and we give and everybody loses as a result of the widow, and we just continue as long as is possible. And of course, again, at the end of the Rashbam there, it says that he actually thinks that the second approach is the one that makes more sense. Okay, so that is the situation when we have. So again, the question is, does the widow cause the estate to become insufficient if it were sufficient before her claim and insufficient after her claim? Now, Imtim Salomer, the Gemara continues. We are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 lines down, right by where the hay is for the Ein Mishpat. Imtim Salomer Kevan de Ilu Menasva Leisla, that maybe you'd say that since if she marries, she doesn't get support, Hashanama Leisla. So here too, we're going to say that she does not, therefore, we're going to say that even when she makes her claim, we're not going to reduce the estate, and so therefore we're going to treat the estate as sufficient. Well, what about Bat Ishto Mahu Shetimai Benachasim? What about the daughter of this widow? Meaning this widow may have had a daughter from another marriage, and now when she got married to her second husband, the second husband committed to support the daughter until she became an adult. So Miamrina and Kevan until she married. Until she became an adult. Do we say that because this daughter, even if she gets married, is going to still get paid out of the estate, so therefore she will reduce the estate? Or maybe her receiving her share of the food, the stepdaughter's share of the food, is based on her being alive. If she were to pass away, she wouldn't get anything. So maybe we should say that because there's a possibility that she could die at any moment, so as a result, we will not allow her to take, and or we will not calculate her taking in determining whether or not an estate is sufficient. And so therefore, we'll say that the estate is sufficient. And moreover, in the next level of question, and maybe we'll say that when it comes to a stepdaughter, that since if she dies, she doesn't take anything, so as a result, we won't view her as reducing the property in an estate. What about a regular creditor? Does a regular creditor have the right? Because do we say that because even if a creditor dies, his heirs, the creditor's heirs, can claim from the estate, and therefore there's really no way to reduce the estate? There's no way to avoid reducing the estate, and therefore we should treat it as if the estate has already been reduced. Oh, Dilma, or maybe Kavan de Machasre Govayu, Lomamai. Or do we say, no, we don't reduce the estate so long as it hasn't yet been collected? And so since this creditor hasn't yet collected the property, the estate is what it is, and as a result, it's right now sufficient, so we're going to treat it as a sufficient estate. So that's the question. Now, it's important, and there are some who say that actually the questions went in the other direction, meaning when it comes to a creditor, do we say that it reduces the estate or not? And then Bas Ishto and Rashbam explains, if we take a look at the top Rashbam as we turn to Kuf Memam Bet, that Bat Ishto Mahu, Intim Solomer Bal Chov Mai, that essentially we're reversing the order of the various intim salomers. That if you were to, that before we said that if you say that the widow does not reduce the estate, well, then what about the daughter? And if you say that the daughter does not reduce the estate, what do you say about a creditor? Now we're going in the other direction. And we're saying if you say that the creditor does reduce the estate, what do you say about the stepdaughter? And if you say that the stepdaughter reduces the estate, what do you say about the widow? So Imtim Salomer, take a look in the Rashbam, top of Kuf Memam Bet. Imtim Salomer Bal Chov Memayid. If you say that the creditor does reduce the estate, Hani Mili, maybe that's only because the Afal Gav de Ilumayas Islay, because even if he were to die, he would collect. But the stepdaughter, the daughter of the wife, delaysle, that she would not collect if in fact she were to die. Imaisa mimata. Do we say that she's going to reduce? And similarly, if we were to say and if we were to say that even the stepdaughter would reduce, would we still say that the widow reduces? So, and then the Gemara continues, Almanaso v'bas ezemehen kodemes. And when it comes to a daughter and a widow, who gets first? Who gets first? Meaning there, as Rashbam explains, second line in the Rashbam of Kuf Memon Amud Bet, v'ein kan ela mazon achat mehen. There's only sufficient food for one of them. V'shteim tovaos mizonos b'tanai ksuva. Both of them are claiming based on a condition in the ketubah. Hilka kevan detervayu b'takanta derabanan achle ezu tikadom. And since both of them have a similar, identical claim on the estate, which of them goes first? So those are the four questions that we have. We have our own version of the four questions. Question one about a widow, or question two about a stepdaughter. Question three about a creditor, and question four is when we look at the priority between a wife and a daughter, who's going to take precedence? So Rabbi, again, this was a question that Rabbi Yirmiyah asked to Rabbi Abahu. So Rabbi Abahu says back, Zilha inna v'ta l'machar. Go now and come tomorrow, meaning I need to do some research. Kiyasa, when he came the next day, Amar Le, Showed miha chada. I can answer one of your questions. The Amar Rebbe Abba Amar Rebbe Asi. For Rabbi Abba said in the name of Rabbi Asi, Asu almana etzel habas. Kivas etzel ha'achen b'nechasim mu'atin. That when it comes to the widow vis-a-vis the daughter, that she's like the daughter vis-a-vis the brothers. Meaning, ma bas etzel achen habas nizones va'achen yishalo apsachim. That a daughters will cause the sons to their brothers to go and beg door to door. Afalmana etzel abbas. So too, a widow relative to a daughter, almanan is onus v'abbas tishal apsachim, that the widow will get fed and the daughter will go begging door to door. So the bottom line is that we've answered the last of the questions, the fourth question, the one about the widow and the daughter. The widow definitely takes precedence. Now, what about those other three questions? Well, it turns out that it's very important whether we go with the Ika de Amri or the original approach. Because in general, we say that when we say Imtim Salomar in the Gemara, we're effectively concluding that that is the halacha. And so if we go the first way, well, then we're saying that definitely a mother, or the widow and the daughter are not going to reduce the estate, but a creditor might reduce the estate. And if we go in the other direction, well, then definitely a creditor and a daughter will reduce the estate, and maybe even the widow will reduce the estate. And so that is a very, very important point in terms of analyzing the halacha. Not with naturally there is a machlokas rishonim, and I did not double check on sort of how we actually paskin. This is not thankfully not too common a situation. So okay. So we've now resolved those questions, or at least addressed one of the questions, and now we go back to our Mishnah. And in our Mishnah, Admon complained, why should he lose if the estate is small simply because he's male? So now the Gemara explains what he's trying to say, offering two explanations, one by Abaye and one by Rava. Admon Omer b'shvil sha'ani zachar hifsadidi, because I'm male, I'm going to lose. So my kamar, what's he saying? So Amar Abaye hachi kamar. This is what he's saying. B'shvil sha'ani zachar b'roi ani la'asot b'torah hifsadidi, because I'm male and therefore I should be learning Torah, I'm going to lose. And the Rashbam explains. If we take a look, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down in the narrow lines of the Rashbam at the end of the line, man da'asik, kolomar, misha yeshlo shnei banim, echad osik b'torah, ve'echad eino osik b'torah, v'chi avad zechuso b'yerushuso, b'shvil she'eino osik. 1 second. Do we say that that somebody who I'm sorry, that this is on the this is a little bit further on, but the bottom line is that I'm going to lose out because I'm able to. I'm sorry. Let's take a look at the first line in the first narrow line in the Rashbam. My kamar, my yofi koach yesh l'zachar b'mizonos b'makom acher. Yoter ben Akeva, meaning what is Admon saying, that a male child should have some kind of greater right than a daughter? The ka'amar b'shvil sha'ani zachar v'zechusi gadol hifsadidi, that somehow because I'm male, I should have a larger right, and I've lost out. So the answer is, Abaye says, is because I learned Torah. So in response to that, Amrle Rava says back, 1 second. Elamiata, man da azak b'Torah hu de yaris. Delo asik b'Torah lo yaris. You're going to tell me that if you have two sons, one who learns Torah and one who doesn't learn Torah, that the one who learns Torah gets the inheritance and the other one does not, as we saw in the Rashbam. Take a look 4 lines down. Manda asik. Kolomar mishi yeshlo shnei banim echad osik b'Torah ve'echad eino osik b'Torah v'chi avad zechusa b'Yerushuso b'shvil she'eino osik. Does the one who does not learn Torah lose his inheritance? Of course not. So as a result, it can't be based on the learning Torah. Ela amar Rava hachikamar b'shvil she'ani zachar, because I'm male. The ro'yani lirash b'nechazim merubin, and therefore I would be ordinarily able to inherit a large estate. Meaning, if the estate was millions of dollars, I would get millions of dollars, and the daughters would get just the amount that is sufficient to support them. So, should I now lose when it's a small amount of property? And so as a result, maybe I should win. Now, there's an interesting principle that comes into play with respect to Admon and Rabbi Gamliel. And if we go back to Daf Kuf Lamed Terem Bet, and we take a look in the bottom Tosos there, it's an interesting point that Tosos raises. Because if we take a look at that Tosos, Amar Rabbi Gamliel roa ani as divrei Admon, b'ketuvot in ketuvot daf kuf terem and aleph Amar kol makom she'amar Rabbi Gamliel roa that anywhere where Rabbi Gamliel says roa ani as divrei Admon, that I agree with Admon, I see the view of Admon, halacha kamoso, the halacha is like him. Well, 1 second, that would imply that the halacha would be like Admon here, namely that even when there's a small estate, the sons will inherit. So Amrle Rava Rav Nachman afilu bebraisa, and Rava says to Rav Nachman that this is true even in a brisa, meaning it's in all kind of Tanaic statements. Mikol hahi sugya, but yet from this entire discussion in the Gemara, mashma da halacha ka'admon. And so in that Gemara over there, it seems that the halacha is like Admon, B'tema, but it's a wonder. Dahacha b'Gemara kula shmaisa kirabanan da Admon. Here the entire Gemara is all according to the rabbis that argued with Admon. Udaloke halchasa, and therefore it would not be like the halacha. Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Yatomim shekadmu umachru b'nechasim mu'atin mochrin machru. That if they said that if they the Yatomim got up and they sold something, even if the estate was small, that it's a valid sale post facto. Well, 1 second, if Admon were correct, well then it would be a valid sale even lechatchila because they would be getting the estate. Ubayinami, Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Abba, and moreover, Rabbi Yirmiyah asked Rabbi Abba, Nami Havya Aliba de Rabbanan. That question was also according to the Rabbanan. V'amar Nami Besota, and moreover in Sota, Heki Dami Russia Arum. What's a case of somebody who is an evil and deceptive person, meaning somebody who's doing trickery, a cunning evildoer. So Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Zeha Mesi Eitzel L'Machor B'Nechasim Muatin. This is somebody who advises the heirs, the boys, to sell the property when it's a small estate, because they really shouldn't be able to do that because it's supposed to go to support the daughters. And if they sell it, it's a valid sale. And so as a result, the daughters are out of luck. So, and again, that is only true according to the Rabbanan in our Mishnah, not according to Admon. So therefore, Rabbeinu Chanano, the Hilchos Gedolos, meaning the Bahag, the Rav Alphys, the Rif, all of them pasku kirabanan to Admon. They all disagree with Admon, and they say that the halacha is actually like the rabbis. Mishum deshmaisin dahacha kivase, because the entire Gemara is like him. Kivase asla goes like him. The Rabbeinu Tam Omer, and Rabbeinu Tam tries to now explain how we could still have Admon's statement and the fact that we always paskin like Admon. And he says that here, Admon lo palagarabanan. He's not really arguing. Ella shemitamya al hatakana shetiknu nechasam mu'atin. He's really just asking a question on the takana that they established for small estates. But he really does think like the rabbis. Below mashmahachi. But actually, the Tosfos says with respect to Rabbeinu Tam's comment that it's not actually the implied language. Midikama Rabbi Gamliel, because after all, Rabbi Gamliel says Roa Ani is Divrei Admon, because he seems to agree with Admon. So that seems to be the bottom line. And actually, so it seems like we paskin like the rabbis opposite Rav Admon. So notwithstanding that we have this question, we're going to paskin like the Rabbanan. So,
excuse me, where is this whole discussion you just read now? I don't see it.
I said it was a Tosfos on the bottom of Kuf Lamed Tet Amud Bet. Kuf Lamed Tet Amud Bet. Last Tosfos on Kuf Lamed Tet Amud Bet.
And Kuf Lamed what?
Kuf Lamed Tet Amud Bet. It's on the bottom of the Mishnah. But it makes more sense to do it now, because now is when we're reading what exactly Admon's position is. So it's now makes sense to go back and say, well, what's the halacha like? And especially since we have this Gemara that says that the halacha is always like Rabbi Gamliel when he says that I agree with Admon. All right. So next Mishnah, Hiniach banim uvanos tum v'tumtum. What about people whose gender is indeterminate? So if somebody leaves over sons and daughters and a tumtum, that's somebody whose genitalia are covered with skin, and as a result, it's impossible to determine whether they're male or female. At least in those days, it was impossible. So without actually cutting, and that might be a difficult situation. So bismancha nechasim merubin, when there are plenty of assets, hazucharim doken oto eitzel hanekevos. So then the sons can say to the tumtum, you get to be treated like a female because after all, you can't prove that you're male. Nechasa mu'atin, and if in fact the estate is small, well then hanekevos dokos oso eitzel zacharim. Well then the daughters can push and say, no, you don't get to inherit with us and get supported. This is a small estate. We need to make sure that there's enough food for us. You have to be treated like you're male, and you have to go begging. So that's rule number one in our Mishnah. Second category, Haomer im teled ishti zachar yitol maneh. If I say that if my son gives birth to a boy, my wife gives birth to a boy, I'm going to give him $100. Yolda zachar yitol maneh. Well, then if she has the boy, then I have to give the $100. Nikeva masai. If I say if she has a girl, I'm going to give her $200. Yalda nekeva notelis masayim. Well, then if in fact she has a girl, I have to give her $200. Im zachar maneh im nekeva masayim. If I say if she has a boy, it's 100, and if she has a girl, it's 200. The yalda zachar unekeva, and she has a boy. And Rashbam here says that he actually thinks that what it's talking about, or a female, because the vav can be an and or an or, and although some people understand that this is being a situation where they had twins, the Rashbam disagrees with that and says that actually this is a situation where the father had said if it's a boy it's $100, if it's a girl it's $200, and so and now she had either a boy or a girl. So zachar notel maneh, nekeva notel matayim. If it was a boy, he gets the 100. If it was a girl, he gets the 200. Yelda tumtum. But on the other hand, if he said if it's a boy, it's 100. If it's a girl, it's 200. And it's a tumtum, eino notel. The tumtum gets nothing. Im amar kol mashet. And now it's interesting, right? He gets nothing, notwithstanding the fact that earlier the tumtum gets the lesser of what a boy or a girl was supposed to get. So one might have thought that in this situation, the tumtum should at least get 100. And we'll see that the Gemara actually differentiates between the first case in our Mishnah and the second case to assign the one to one opinion and another to another opinion in order to make these consistent. Im amar kol masha teled ishti yitol. But if the father says, whatever my wife has, I'm going to give the child this amount, harei zeh yitol. Well, then even the tumtum will take that amount. Vim ein sham yorish elahu. If there's no heir other than the tumtum, yorish is a kol. Well, then the tumtum gets everything, because of course, if there's no one else, so then the tumtum would still be able to take. So dochen oto v'shakel bavat. So the implication of the fact that when we said at the very beginning that the boys get to push him away and say to the females, the implication is the shakil kivas, that he's going to act, that this tumtum is actually going to take like a daughter. But 1 second, Hakatani Seifa, Yalda Tumtum Aina Notel. But 1 second, when it came to, as I noted at the beginning when we learned the Mishnah, if in fact the baby is a tumtum and the father had said $100 for a boy and $200 for a girl, the tumtum gets nothing. Why don't we say, just like in the beginning of the Mishnah, that the tumtum gets the lesser amount? Why don't we say that here? So Amar Abaye, Dochanaso ve'enlo, that when we say that he pushes away, it means that he pushes away and he doesn't get anything. Not that he takes like a girl. It means he pushes away and that's it. The Rabba Amar Dochanaso ve'yeshlo. But Rabban says no. Rabba says no. It's you push away and you do get, meaning that in the Resha of our Mishnah, the tumtum gets like a daughter if in fact there's plenty of assets. The Seifa, Asan Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. But the end of our Mishnah follows Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, because Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel treats a tumtum as if they are an independent creation and not male or female. Titania, because we have a brisa, Yalda tumtum va'androgynous, if one were to have a tumtum or an androgynous. So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Omer ein kedusha chala aleihen. Now this is not talking about a human person. This is talking about an animal. And we're dealing with a situation where the animal where the owner of the mother animal says that the child animal is going to be for a sacrifice. If it's male, it's going to be for an ola. If it's hold on a second, I forgot to scroll. Let me remind myself that if in fact if it's a male, it's going to be an ola, and if it's a female, it's going to be a shlamim. And in the end, when it has a tumtum, the animal that's born is a tumtum, and you can't tell, or it's an androgynous, so it has both. So again, you can't tell. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says that there's no sanctity that goes on this animal, because it is neither male nor female. And so as a result, it's not treated as anything. Whereas other opinions say that because it's potentially one or the other, it has to be treated effectively as sanctified, and you need to worry about the sanctity. So we see that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel treats a tumtum and androgynous as a different category altogether. So 1 second, now we're going to ask a question on Abaye. So Meisvei, Tumtum Yorish Kiven, Benizon Kivat. And Tumtum inherits like a son and is fed like a daughter. Now, Bishlam ala Rava, this makes sense according to Rava. Yorish Kiven, Benechasim Muatin. He inherits like a son when the property is small, when their estate is small. Benizon Kivat, Benechasim and Reuben. And he is fed and supported like a daughter when the estate is large, because according to Rava's read, and according to the Mishnah, we're treating the tumtum child, the worse of whether it's a boy or a girl. But Elala Abaye. But according to Abaye, man nizam kivat. What does it mean that he's supported like a daughter? So the Gemara explains on Abaye's behalf. Ulatamech 1 second. According to you, l'Rava ma yorish kavein. What does yorish kavein mean? Right? It says that Rava says that he inherits like a son. It inherits like a son when there are meager assets, when the estate is small. Well, and a son doesn't inherit anything when the estate is small. He has to go begging. So Ella royally resh ve'enlo. The point is that the son, that the tumtum inherits like a son when the estate is small, meaning that he maybe should inherit, but he actually gets nothing at all. So hakanami royal zone ve'enlo. So too, when we say that the tumtum gets treated like a daughter to be fed, it means he really maybe should get fed, but in fact, he gets nothing at all. And so as a result, we see that there's this machlokas between how we deal with a tumtum. Do we treat the tumtum as a different creation? And as a result, it's not a suffix male, suffix female, but rather something altogether different. And therefore, it gets treated like a separate category. Or do we say, no, it's a suffix male, suffix female, and so we treat it like whichever is worst for the tumtum because of the principle of hamotzi mechavero olav haraya. So that leaves us to where we noted in the Mishnah that the father committed more money for a girl than a boy. So the Gemara is now going to address why that the Mishnah would choose to do so. For the discussion of that, please stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.